Welcome, everybody. This is Michael McAvoy, and you're listening to the Metabolic Healing VIP support call. It is Wednesday, April 25th, 2018. Hope you're doing well today. We're going to go over a case study discussing RCCX and hypermobility syndromes. Many of you know about this particular area of research that I've been engaged in for quite some time now, and it's taken me down many different rabbit holes, and it's really changed my perspective about not only chronic illness, but it's also really changed my entire perspective about what we know about physiology and biology. And it's done this because many of the models that we use to understand the body are outdated and are subject to the laws of time and space. And because they're subject to the laws of time and space, these theories, these models that we use to understand cell biology and human physiology become outdated. And so it's always important to kind of go back to use your own discriminative insight to develop new ways of looking at problems and new ways of looking at the human body. People are always wanting to know, well, what kind of a physiology class should I take? What kind of a cell biology class should I take? Well, you go ahead and open up a physiology textbook and you tell me how many times do they mention the lymphatic system. You open up a physiology textbook and you tell me how much attention is actually given to the extracellular matrix. You open up a cell biology textbook and you try to tell me about how many times they discuss the intricate relationships between the connective tissue and the modulation of the life cycle of the cell. The reality is that none of those occur. None of those occur in the physiology textbooks because the way that Western physiology works is it's highly reductionistic. It's based upon abstract models and abstract concepts, many of which have been disproven over and over again, and fail to take into account and consideration the reality of how the human body works. So the Germans were well aware of this concept decades ago, and I'm talking about the really innovative, cutting edge, very, very influential and powerful German doctors and scientists and researchers. Germany is the country that brought us homeopathy, at least how it's modernly practiced. Germany is the country that has explored the mechanisms. I'm talking about the Alfred Pissinger and Heine and Helmut Schimmel. Have explored these concepts related to the extracellular matrix and have explored the ways to modulating and controlling the physiology of the body through the modulation of the extracellular matrix. But here in the United States, we don't have that. Here in the United States, we have a medicine, a so-called scientific model based upon abstract concepts of intricate cell biological pathways, a dizzying array, a dizzying maze of cell biology and the converging reductionistic views of how the human body is actually supposed to work based on these abstract models. But the truth of the situation is that if you extract, if you isolate the cell from its environment, from its external environment, from its extracellular matrix, you are creating nothing more than a biological abstraction. When you study a cell in vitro, when you study and look at the behavior of a cell in a test tube, for example, or in a petri dish, you are, in effect, creating an artificial model for trying to understand, for attempting to understand how that cell behaves under certain circumstances and conditions. The problem with that is that these models that they create do not necessarily reflect the reality of how the cell actually behaves. And when you specifically remove the extracellular environment, you are automatically creating an abstraction that isn't real. And so we have now many different types of disease processes, for example, the pathophysiology, studying the so-called pathophysiology or the associated etiologies of how a disease is supposed to exist. These models are all based upon these abstract concepts of the cell, are based upon the abstract models of how cell biology was in effect created through abstraction, through reductionism, while removing, through their petri dish science, while removing the actual mechanisms of how those cells are operating when in conjunction with an entire holistic organism. When you start to get into the research of the extracellular matrix, when you start to actually see what people like Alfred Pissinger and Heine were doing, the type of research that they were conducting decades ago, you begin to appreciate and understand that what we have today in our so-called Western physiological context is a false, abstract, reductionistic model that fails to encapsulate or even adequately represent the truth of cell biology or cell physiology, or for that matter, the truth or the actuality of human disease, the actuality of pathophysiology and the associated etiologies of what diseases are caused by, and how a network of coexisting factors, a network of coexisting physiological processes must converge to contribute to the pathological process in all cases. So as I start to veer deeper into this area of research, I find that a lot of the models that I used to use, a lot of the different parts of the map that I used to use, a lot of my previous understandings have been deconstructed, have been discarded, have been thrown out the door, or have been left as they are, as abstract concepts. I am now attempting to view the body and to view my clients in a more holistically oriented manner. And to me, it starts with looking at the behavior of how cells function when they're connected to their environment and what happened, their extracellular environment. What happens when, asking questions of what happens when the extracellular environment is compromised? What happens when individuals present with syndromes of hypermobility, joint hypermobility, skin hyperelasticity? When you start to look at the familial histories that are related to certain key findings, when you start to look at the familial history associated with individuals that have joint hypermobility, I'm talking about when you start to look at mental illness, when you start to look at autoimmune diseases, when you start to look at mental and behavioral disorders, when you start to look at post-traumatic stress disorders and associated autonomic nervous system dysregulation of varying degrees, when you start to see patterns emerging in families. So I'm now taking inventory with these types of people by looking at familial history, because the familial history is oftentimes telling me more about the individual than a set of lab tests. Looking at familial history as a way to develop a necessary set of objectives and a necessary set of hypotheses about what may be going wrong in said individuals, by having a deeper understanding and appreciation for the extracellular matrix, for the milieu, the ground substance, the regulator of the physiology of the body, in my opinion, is the extracellular matrix. It is, as the Chinese have described 2,500 years ago in the ancient texts on acupuncture, the organ that covers everything but has no form. It is the environment in which our cells and organs and tissues operate. It is the connector. It is the meeting place of the neuroendocrine immune systems, the central and autonomic nervous systems, the endocrine systems, the immunological processes that are operating outside of the bloodstream in the level of the tissues. This is taking place in the extracellular matrix, in the milieu of connective tissues, in the milieu of glycosaminoglycans, the polysaccharide-rich interstitium and the interstitial fluids and interstitial proteins that reside within the extracellular matrix environment, is in effect the control levers for how the physiology of the body works and operates. It is the control lever. It is the ground source communication between the brain stem, the extracellular matrix, and the alarm signals that get set off when the tissues become disrupted by either pathogenic or toxic influence or both, the alarm system gets set off in mast cell activation syndromes, mast cell activation disorders, where you have a cacophony of histamine release taking place in the extracellular matrix by the mast cells that are resident in the extracellular matrix, because the fibroblasts have changed their communication system with the mast cells in the matrix. We have the association between purinergic signaling, which is taking place outside of the cell, and its relationship to the innate and adaptive immune systems and the extracellular matrix. It all comes together when you begin to understand the truly holistic and miraculous network of tissue, the miraculous and integrated network of tissue, which is based upon our evolution as embryological templates from a pre-fetal environment. The extracellular matrix is born of fascia and the 3 different kinds of connective tissue that arose from the embryological template from when we were before we were born. Our organs, our tissues, our brain, our liver, our stomach, our pancreas, our spleen, our kidneys, all derive from this embryological template of fascia and connective tissue. And it is still expressive. It is still highly integrative and innervated with various substances such as light, such as water, such as electromagnetism. The power influence of physics upon the connective tissue, upon the matrix, has a profound and measurable effect. So as we start to get into this, we want to appreciate the depth of how this work can relate back to our client cases, especially those kinds of clients that have complex or chronic illnesses, that have unexplained illnesses that may have been to dozens or hundreds of healthcare practitioners who haven't been able to find them, have been to the most so-called prestigious medical institutes, and they run elaborate tens of thousands of dollars of tests, all to be told that we can't find out what's wrong with you. Well, they all ran these tests and found nothing because they neglected their understanding of the extracellular matrix. They ignored, they never investigated, they never made the connections, they never made the associations between how the human body actually works, and instead they relied upon their abstract models of cell biology, which are all based upon misrepresentations and missed opportunities. So as we start to unravel the complexities of chronic illness, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, autoimmune disease, mental illness, when we start to look at these kinds of disease processes, cancer, we begin to understand that the body is communicating and expressing through the matrix as the matrix, and that is the mechanism, that is the ground substance that controls how the physiology operates in a homeostatic as well as a dysbiotic, as well as a pathophysiological state. So I digress. That was my 13-minute and 42-second introduction. Let's go ahead and get into this miniature case study here. Bear with me one moment as I do a screen share with you. Actually, I don't want to do that screen share. Let's do another one instead. Let's do that one. No, sorry. That is not what I want. Okay, good enough. Okay, so load this up a little bit so you can see that's too much. Let's go to 75%. Maybe that'll work. So we have a female, age 42, and I'm at the point in my practice where I like to have the client send me their whole kind of, story. And, a lot of clients already like doing this because it gives them the ability to express themselves, which is fine. But from a clinical perspective, what I'm looking to do is to go through the material that they send me. And by the way, this is only a short list of all the stuff that I was sent. And I'm talking about pages of stuff. I'm interested in picking out key pieces of information from their narrative and to begin to analyze it and to understand it and to deconstruct it and to make sense of it. So this individual had read the RCCX case, the RCCX articles that I had written, and she believed that it succinctly explained her quote-unquote comorbidities, her compounded health issues. And we want to be able to develop a level of discernment as well as a criticism of our own biases. We need to kind of really be aware of our own biases. And, you know, I've been for many years and probably still am highly prone to making associations that simply were wrong. Most of the recommendations and associations I make are probably wrong. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with being wrong. I need to understand that, you know, most of the time we're not right, we're wrong. So with all that said, if I'm right and 10 to 20% of the time, especially the things that matter, then at least I'll have some good direction and hope that my recommendations will stick and will actually have some impact. And so is the case here. So run through all of this stuff. Some of the major stuff for me: tachycardia, symptoms of chronic fatigue, joint pain, hypermobility of the finger joints. I should say that the hypermobility of the finger joints is associated with vascular EDS, which is a very bad form of EDS. Now, it's not been formally diagnosed. Who cares about EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? It is, in my opinion, it is an outdated, arcane, reductionistic, and false way of viewing the problem. We now know that there is the ability to have a hypermobile phenotype with all of the classic symptoms of EDS without having a haploinsufficiency of the genes. Because that's a fact, that's been proven in the literature. In my opinion, all of the diagnostic criteria for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or just let's say most of it, needs to be thrown out of the window because it's no longer applicable or relevant. Read the Chen Morissette paper from 2016. You'll know what I'm talking about. In any event, we have a number of complications in this client's case: inflammation, fatigue, joint pain, extremely uneasy, on and on and on and on and on forever. Mast cell activation syndrome, so comorbidities, a panoply of symptoms, a panoply of complex illnesses. Been to several highly integrative healthcare practitioners, including some people that I view to be brilliant in their, I'd say genius in their level of clinical work, and they still couldn't figure her out. So here is the True Report intake. As we see, some pretty hefty stuff. And I just point out this is that if you're using True Report, if you haven't used True Report, use it, because you're going to get a lot from it. And this is what you're going to get with the client management software part of it. Your basic physiological assessment survey, looking at 6 systems: blood sugar, digestion, liver, gallbladder, thyroid, adrenal, and cardiovascular, as well as 12 potential condition-specific indicators. And now, if we're seeing stuff above 50%, that's a flag. So, for example, when there's a yeast imbalance popping up at 84%, that's pretty damning, right? Now, there's, of course, a lot of overlap with this stuff. We can't say definitively if these conditions actually exist or not. They're just a clue. They are an indicator. They are a way for the clinician to see. If you actually go in the report, you can break down every one of the symptoms that goes with each of these categories and these themes to give you a better understanding of what is causing what. So there is overlap. Symptoms are not a diagnostic criteria. Who cares? We use them anyway. I use symptoms to pick them apart, to develop my own hypotheses about what is going on with these people, with this client. We see her adrenal axis plopping it at 80%. That's extremely elevated. Blood sugar, basically blood sugar, digestion, adrenal, probably thyroid axis and cardiovascular. All of these are coming up. And because of the hypermobility syndrome and the existing comorbidities that are associated in these regards, we have to appreciate that the extracellular matrix dysregulation is probably playing a substantial role in her health. So just a little bit of a review of the extracellular matrix after my little rant there at the beginning. The extracellular matrix is a ubiquitous meaning found everywhere, ubiquitous matrix of collagen, connective tissue, and myofascia. And the extracellular matrix, or the ECM for short, is comprised of polysaccharides, which are a type of complex sugar. And the polysaccharides are, you can think of it as the basic food stuff, the basic nutritive component of the extracellular matrix constituents. You also have in here proteoglycans, which are protein sugars, glycosaminoglycans, which are complex protein sugars. And there are 4 types of glycosaminoglycans. If you don't know what those are, I highly recommend going into our functional and nutritional blood chemistry course on the section that highlights those 4 GAGs, glycosaminoglycans, and their importance in hydration, tissue homeostasis, etc. The extracellular matrix provides the structure and the frame for cells. It is the container. Cells must maintain their adherence to the extracellular matrix. When the adherence and adhesions of the extracellular matrix to the cells is faulty or fails, cells undergo a form of apoptosis, a form of cell program death, when they lose their connection to the matrix. So the cell membrane has on it what's called these sticky sugar films, glycocalyx, for example, which is found in different types of tissues like epithelial and endothelial tissues, highly etiological in cardiovascular disease. Oh, but let's just look at cholesterol because that's really the most important thing, right? Sure, let's just forget about the glycocalyx. Let's forget about the adherence of the extracellular matrix to the endothelium and intima. Forget it. Let's just look at controlling markers on tests and forget about the connective tissue. Anyway, I digress. So the extracellular matrix is a structure and frame for cells, but it also has an important role to play in modulating the cell life cycle. We now know that many different cell processes are dependent upon the extracellular environment. The extracellular matrix is spun out, and I use the word literally spun because it's spun out by a type of a cell called fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are like the spiders, and the extracellular matrix tissues are the web. The fibroblast spiders weave the collagen fibrils and creates this triple helix-like structure that is piezoelectrically charged. The way that acupuncture works, one of the main ways, is through the stimulation of key junctions in the myofascial tissue, which are all derived from pre-embryological stem cell pathways, and by the manipulation and the insertion of needle points in certain key parts of that fascial tissue, microcurrents of electrical charge get stimulated, which has a ground regulating effect on the entire physiology through the autonomic reflex arcs back to the limbic brain, back to the brain stem. These are being stimulated. Acupuncture also works through a process of leukocytolysis, through a tremendous breakdown of white blood cells in the tissues and circulation of the body. Billions of white blood cells get degraded instantaneously once a single needle is inserted into the connective tissue. The extracellular matrix modulates at least 15 to 20 of the body's growth factors. That includes the ubiquitous cytokine and growth factor transforming growth factor beta, the whole family of TGF-beta, requires operative connective tissue. That also includes epidermal growth factors, insulin growth factor 1, and a huge list of other growth factors which regulates how stem cells get used, how new cells get made, and how new cells differentiate. The process of cancer involves undifferentiated cell growth, where cells cannot stop multiplying because they're stuck in a state of aerobic glycolysis most of the time. So cancer is heavily etiological. The extracellular matrix and its dysregulation is heavily etiological in cancer initiation, as well as metastases and the spreading of tumor through the connective tissue, through the lymphatic system, which are the tributaries of lymph fluid which run through the connective tissue. Cells cannot maintain their nourishment without lymph. The lymph carries nutrients, electrolyte fluid, fat-soluble vitamins, and amino acids and lipids to your cells. They are the transport mechanism of nutrition to your cells, and this is happening through the connective tissue in the lymphatic system. The extracellular matrix modulates tissue hydration. If we look at the research of the exclusion zone water, which is coming out of Dr. Gerald Pollack's decades of research and clinical practice emerging as the quote-unquote fourth phase of water, we understand that the molecular sieve of the extracellular matrix matrosomes is like comprised of tunnel-like structures which are constantly pumping out protons, leading to a highly negatively charged interior, which is essentially playing a substantial role, if not a primary role, in the actual hydration of the tissue. Glycosaminoglycans like hyaluronic acid, which is in the extracellular matrix, is critical for the movement of water to the tissues, water or electrolyte solution. So in order for tissues to maintain their adequate hydration and charge, you've got to have an operating extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix functions as a toxin pathogen barrier. Ascorbate, vitamin C, is highly concentrated in the extracellular matrix as a way to prevent the degradation of collagen. When we have chronic disease processes such as chronic inflammatory response syndromes or Lyme disease, or the toxic exposure of certain antibiotics, or all antibiotics possibly, especially those of the fluoroquinolone class like ciprofloxacin, we have literally a degradation to the extracellular matrix. We have the release of metalloproteinase 1, metalloproteinase 3, and metalloproteinase 9, which bore holes in the extracellular matrix, enabling highly noxious and inflammatory processes to ensue, causing the innate immune system to create a tremendous amount of collateral damage in the process. If we have sufficient nutritional and antioxidant defense mechanisms in our connective tissue, namely the level of ascorbate, we have a barrier of protection to prevent free radical toxicity from creating matrix degradation and the subsequent pathogenic and toxic insults. Toxins, such as the trivalent metals, like mercury, aluminum, and cadmium, for example, will exert powerful toxic influences upon the matrix, because the matrix being comprised of negatively charged glycosaminoglycans and other polar groups, we have attraction of opposites, where positively charged triple cationic metals such as aluminum, which is being injected into the tissues in the form of vaccines in infants and children who do not even have a developed extracellular matrix. This aluminum is going to bind strongly to the negatively charged sulfate groups in the 4-glycosaminoglycans, leading towards hydrolytic cleavage activities caused by the metalloproteinases, leading towards probable autoimmune processes against the toxins that are in our matrix. The matrix needs to be drained of toxins. It is a reservoir of polar groups. Many positively charged toxins, I've only mentioned a couple, will accumulate therein. Stephanie Seneff, the MIT scientist, has proposed radical evidence suggesting that the pesticide glyphosate causes disruption by replacing glycine in the connective tissue, glycine being the most abundant amino acid found in the extracellular matrix network of collagens. The extracellular matrix is a reservoir of immune cells that includes the mast cells and macrophages, macrophages being, of course, essentially, let me think here, macrophages being essentially macrocytes. Macrophages are in the tissues. Basophils, mast cells are a type of a basophil. And so mast cell activation disorder is largely due to toxicity in the extracellular matrix. That's not debatable. The highest concentration of mast cells in the human body is in the connective tissue. I know I'm dropping a lot of bombs, and this may be very new information for many of you, but I'm one of the only people today talking about all of these associations. So, but feel free to do all your own research. The extracellular matrix also has a modulatory effect on the clotting time through heparin sulfate, which is one of the glycosaminoglycans. Heparin sulfate, as many of you know, does not only provide structural framework for connective tissue, it is also integrally involved in clotting mechanisms. There are other mechanisms of clotting that could be influenced by the matrix as well, such as aldosterone, which is going to be sensitive to the hydration status of the tissues. If the extracellular matrix is dysfunctional, the tissue hydration is going to be compromised, and consequently, the clotting time could be compromised as well. Skin bruising symptoms, very common among those with hypermobility syndromes, likely because matrix dysfunction is taking place and we have a disruption of the clotting cascades. Last but not least, the extracellular matrix is a central battleground for the neuroendocrine and immune cell activities. We cannot think of these systems as being separate. In fact, in actuality, in reality, the nervous system, endocrine, and immune systems are highly conserved and interlocked inseparably. RCCX, it's a copy number variation gene cluster on chromosome 6. In my opinion, it likely represents a significant turning point in the evolutionary process. I have many new theories about it. I will not be sharing those today. And what you need to know is that RCCX codes for very important proteins. Codes for the protein known as CYP21A2, which is the gene that makes cortisol and aldosterone from progesterone. It codes for another gene known as the complement C4, which is part of the innate immune system, arguably one of the most important innate immune system proteins. It's also etiologic in synaptic pruning. When you have autism spectrum disorder, when you have bipolar and schizophrenia, there are likely problems happening with synaptic pruning. Hence, the relationship between adenosine, purinergic signaling, complement C4, the immune system, and the nervous system. You also have on the RCCX cluster TNXB, or tenascin X, which is the most, quote, abundant glycoprotein in the extracellular matrix, which binds to and has many binding sites for many of the body's growth factors, including TGF-beta and vascular endothelial growth factor, which is necessary for angiogenesis, blood vessel formation, tissue oxygenation, and repair processes. You have a fourth gene known as RP1. Function is unknown, but it might be a transcription factor, and there will be evidence of this later. Unlike singular nucleotide polymorphisms, RCCX is a copy number variation. A genotype that features copy numbers and pseudogene sets on the chromosome is highly prone to genomic instability. I believe that RCCX genotypes represent a significant factor for comorbidities, the complex chronic illnesses that coexist among individuals with hypermobile joints. This is a simplified graphic of the different genotypes of an RCCX modular forms. There are basically three different forms: a monomodular, bimodular, and trimodular. These are each genotyped for each individual. There's differences here, as you can see. The pseudogenes, which are located in red on the cluster, these are like miniature versions of the genes, only exist in the bimodular and trimodular forms. The other thing that you note on the bimodular and trimodular forms is that there are more complement C4 repeats than there are with the monomodular form. Remember that the HERV-K retrovirus is concentrated within the 9th intron of the C4 gene, and this might represent something significant, especially as it relates to ding, 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 cell danger signaling. So I digress. So here's the initial consult notes for my client, the 42-year-old female. Now, when I'm in a consult with somebody, I'm looking to take notes. I'm listening intently on what they're saying, and I'm typing it all at the same time. And I've already reviewed all their data. Now, I'm going to say this. There were lab tests that other clinicians had run. I looked at them. They served no purpose to me, none whatsoever. I used my understanding, my instincts, my clinical instincts, and my understanding of the supposed physiology of this hypermobile phenotype to understand what I felt I needed to do, because I didn't think the consequences of the problem were necessarily being caused by one factor. I'm not going to look at $10,000 worth of tests. I'm going to use my intelligence, my clinical investigative skills, my question asking, and my protocol construction to basically put it together. And that's basically what I did. The labs were not really of much use at all, and there were a lot that were run. We could have run more to have fun in shits and giggles, but I just decided to go with my own instincts instead. Call that whatever you want, but that's the way I did it. So she has some of the minor criteria for vascular EDS. She was very freaked out about this. There's a history of cardiovascular disease in the family. Vascular EDS can manifest. She did have one of the symptoms of that is that she has an abnormally formed bicuspid or tricuspid valve. If you see that for a client, look for hypermobility syndromes, look at matrix dysregulation, which traces back to pre-embryological states of problems. So again, the connective tissue forms in the embryological template sometime in the first trimester or earlier, who knows. But she's short in stature, so she has a bicuspid instead of a tricuspid valve, as shown in the echocardiogram. She has severe chest pain upon exertion, angina. Sinuses out of the upper right are congested, possible Marcons, who knows. She's got loose teeth, which is also a connective tissue problem. Right shoulder is painful. She has gum recession. That's a minor EDS criteria diagnostic. She's got headaches, chest pain more on the right side, crowded teeth, gum recession, fingers are hypermobile, toes have hyperextensibility. Her son had a false positive for congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and he does have hyperextended elbows. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia is caused by a deficiency of CYP21A2, which is on the RCCX gene cluster. That was so-called a false positive. They thought it was going on in her son's case, but evidently it's not. So it's suspicious because we know that a lot of that genetic criteria could be bullshit. Pardon my French. Dull ache at the base of the occiput, that could be related to Chiari malformation. A dura mater pressing down on the cerebellum, it's a connective tissue problem, extracellular matrix problem, potentially. Loose skin, 4 out of 10. Hyperelasticity of the skin is often caused by an elastin deficiency, which is one of the constituents of the extracellular matrix that helps to form collagen. The loose skin, if it is an elastin deficiency, we typically see good results using copper supplementation because copper helps to stimulate elastin production. Whenever you see a client that has difficulty swallowing and attention problems, think low dopamine, and tyrosine possibly is a useful adjunct here. Bruising on the legs are not common anymore. They used to happen a lot more, but they do occur during flare-ups. So I'm thinking, well, when the matrix becomes compromised because of inflammation, we start to see changes in the clotting in the tissue, and that affects the bruising. That could also affect the oxygen flow in the tissue as well. So think of the sequence of events, or at least hypothesize the sequence of events that take place. When a flare-up occurs, there's joint pain, weakness, fight or flight reactions. So we're thinking about catecholamine, adrenal response, all that stuff. Veil of fatigue comes over her, tip of the tongue becomes red, circulation becomes disrupted, whole cacophony of things start to go wrong, as you could see. She's got mast cell symptoms, random itchiness on the skin, headaches, worse during the spring and fall. There's an emotional component. There's limbic issues, fear-driven, brain wired for danger. That's RCCX in my mind. Remember that the limbic brain is directly connected to the adrenal cortex because of the fact that you've got feedback loops. In the limbic brain, the hypothalamus and amygdala are highly rich in cortisol receptors and are sensitive to the response of ACTH. We know that purinergic signaling which has a relationship to the extracellular matrix, mind you, that the purinergic signaling can release cortisol in the adrenal cortex independently of ACTH in the brain. Crazy, right? We get to learn more new things every day. So anyway, 13 amalgam fillings in the baby teeth. They were all removed. She's got 8 large amalgam fillings in the adult teeth. She's mercury toxic. There's no question about it. No root canals, thank God. So let's see here. So some initial consult notes. I recommended a sequence of, she got the script for low-dose naltrexone because it can modulate brain wired for danger kinds of symptoms. I recommended a little bit of aloe vera, CBD oil, MAP amino acids, sodium ascorbate, Aquamin, which is a marine red algae with sulfated polysaccharides, and tyrosine. I recommended some neurology modulation using the Juve light therapy, near-infrared 850 nanometer. There's significant evidence that suggests that near-infrared light in that spectrum modulates the brain as well as the connective tissues and the mitochondria. She didn't do it. She didn't do that. She didn't do the LDN, and she didn't do the CBD at this point. She didn't do the tyrosine. She didn't do a lot of the recommendations that I gave, so she didn't have any improvement. Well, that's just the way it is. Who knows? She's very sensitive to supplements at this point, right? So I did recommend some meditation and some stress reduction management, which she did start doing, I believe. She did some of the blue light blocking stuff. Don't look at screens at night. Don't let your melatonin get shut down. Don't let your brain get turned on when your brain should be in shutdown mode, sleep mode. She didn't do the CBD, didn't do the Aquamin. She didn't do any of this stuff. She did a very minimal improvement. We're noted following this. We had another consult 2 months later. She reported that the George's aloe vera caused adverse effects. So we discontinued the aloe vera. I did not actually originally recommend the aloe vera. She saw that on the QSAC protocol and asked if it was okay to try it. I said, okay, go ahead and do it, but she didn't react well to it. She did start, at the time of this consultation, she did start maitake, which is a type of a mushroom. So all of these medicinal mushrooms are very rich in polysaccharides. And the polysaccharides contained in them not only these beta-glucans, beta-1,3 glucans, which have an immunomodulatory effect, but they're also going to be other types of polysaccharides in there as well. She started taking the Culturelle probiotic. This is a probiotic that's often useful for mast cell activation syndrome. And she tolerated that well. She tolerated maitake well. She thought she may have been not tolerating the MAP amino acids well. I use the MAP amino acids because it's a special form of amino acid that has a low nitrogen overload. So it's often useful for connective tissue problems. I had her simplify her diet a little bit, start doing some bone broth and some fats. I said, will you please start the CBD oil? I highlighted specifically, I wanted her to do the CBD because it has so many multitude of effects. But here was a study that was done that showed that CBD endocannabinoid receptors exist in the collagen fibroblasts. Well, you better believe that's something I'm going to be paying attention to. Not only is CBD immunomodulatory, GABAergic, and all this stuff, but it modulates collagen fibroblast activity. Remember that the fibroblasts are the spiders that spin the web in the connective tissue. They make the connective tissue. Well, because I believe that the extracellular matrix controls the physiology, if we can control the matrix through various mechanisms, we can control the physiology. That is what I've said. That is what people like Alfred Pissinger have said. That is what people like Hartmut Heine have said. Control modulate the extracellular matrix, control the physiology. Well, I'm going to look at every possible way to control the matrix that I possibly can in these people. So she added, I also had her to add the lion's mane polysaccharide. So the lion's mane is probably the richest source of polysaccharides of any of the mushrooms. I experimented with boiling these stuff down for hours, and I came up with a soup broth from lion's mane that is extremely rich in polysaccharides. Unbelievable. So anyway, there's no reason not to do the bone broth as long as you get good sourcing, high source of collagen and glycine. Do it. She did it. So she was more compliant in the second protocol here. Some of the symptoms, chest pain and stretching types of reactions were going on. Here we go. This is the third consult. So we're about 6 months into it or so. She's feeling better. She felt like she's reached a new layer of healing. Yes, she's doing more yoga and walking more. She's not crashing as hard. The severe leg pain that she's had has subsided. She's overall doing very well. She's very fragile and needs to stay on track with everything. She said she tried going on some extreme diet for weight loss. That was not my recommendation. She crashed again. She realized that she needed carbohydrates. If she did not have carbs or sugar, she could not function. So just a side note for anybody that really wants to recommend ketogenic diets, doesn't work for everybody. Some people need carbohydrates, especially if they have porphyria, which we don't think she has here. But secondary porphyria typically responds well to high carbohydrate foods. And I said, well, carbohydrates and sugars are the basis of the polysaccharides. Body makes polysaccharides, right? Well, what are they? They're sugars. Well, where do you get them from? Well, you get them from probably from carbohydrates, right? Anyway, so the protocol, she's doing well. And according to the notes, the additions of sodium ascorbate and the lion's mane seem to have taken her to the next level. Quote, that's from her. Why did I recommend sodium ascorbate? Because it's an electrolyte. It's an electrolyte bound to vitamin C. Do I think that works better than calcium ascorbate or ascorbic acid? Yes, I do. Is there evidence in the scientific literature of that? No, there isn't. Is it my hypothesis? Yes, it is. I'm using sodium ascorbate with hypermobile people, and I feel like that's a superior form because I want to control the electrolyte balance in the connective tissue, and I'm using different ways of doing that. Remember that ascorbate protects the matrix. It protects the collagen from degradation. Vitamin C is critical for collagen stabilization. Again, controlling the matrix using these different things. Lion's mane is a mushroom that's the richest source of polysaccharides. It took her to the next level. Quote, she tolerates those quite well. I believe also that the CBD, what she's now is doing the Quicksilver stuff from Crishade, which is micronized and liposomal 3 times daily. She's tolerating it very well. So the CBD modulating the connective tissue through fibroblast receptor binding, all that good stuff. She's tolerating the cultural probiotic. The mast cell stuff is under control. So look at all subsided or gone. This is after 6 months. This is a complex client, folks. This is a tough, tough case that some of the most genius physicians and clinicians that I know and have respect for could not get the needle moved with her. We moved the needle in less than 6 months. Mast cell flushing, gone, or subsided or gone. Joint pain in hands and feet, gone. Sleep issues previously associated with being wired and tired, gone or substantially improved. Fear, gone or improved. Inflamed feeling, gone or improved. Chest pain, gone or improved. The dull aches, gone or improved. Difficulty swallowing is better, not really an issue, and can flare with mast cell stuff, but typically under control. Random bruising is better, but not consistent. Chest pain is gone. Tachycardia still bounce around a little bit. So with the tachycardia stuff, I'm still thinking electrolytes. I'm still thinking we need to hydrate the tissues better. So we're going to keep going with this protocol. I made it here in my notes. Maintain adequate hydration. Remember, the tissues with laxity of connective tissue, i.e. hypermobility, have hydration issues because the glycosaminoglycans like hyaluronic acid pulls the water and the ions and the electrolyte solution into the tissues. So if the hydration is off, the entire charge of the organ or tissue is off. If the matrix is not hydrated, the matrix cannot function. If one little thing is off with the matrix, you've got systemic chaos. Therefore, we have to surround the dragon. We have to go in there and we have to support every possible thing we can in order to control the matrix and to control the physiology of the body in these phenotypes. And that's what we did in this case. So hydration is absolutely critical, not just because of the blood electrolytes, but more importantly, in these phenotypes with hypermobility, we've got to modulate ionic charge in the connective tissue. And we do that with salt, with water, with sunlight, and with your fundamental ways of controlling the body's stress response. The Paracin Plus was added as an acetylcholine support. She seems to tolerate that quite well. That is to support her brain. Boom, there we have it. Control the matrix, control the physiology. Hope you learned a lot. I'm getting off this call, everybody. I don't see any questions in the chat. So there you have it. In summary, I think there's one more slide, actually. Give me a second. I'll go through that with you. So the keys to her success: compliance. Remember, she didn't follow any of the protocol stuff for at least the first couple months. She was sensitive and didn't want to do it, or who knows. But once she started doing some of the stuff, it all got dialed in and everything started working. The stress reduction was a key to her success. Got to control the limbic system. Got to control the cortisol response. We do that through lifestyle. Primarily, number one, move the body, move the connective tissue. Yoga, guess what? You're not stretching muscles, you're modulating the connective tissue. I've been doing yoga professionally for 18 years. It's not about, anybody that thinks that yoga is about flexibility doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. It is a way to enhance the communication in the fascia and connective tissue. The carbohydrates in her diet were critical. Obviously, that was a key. And the supplemental keys were the CBD, lion's mane, maitake ascorbate, sodium ascorbate, and the Culturelle probiotic. There you have it. I hope you learn a lot. And got any chat here? Anybody want to say anything? The lion's mane, I had her do I wanted to have her make it herself, but she wasn't into that. Most of the clients I have them boil it. They don't want to do it. They just want to take a supplement. It was not the liquid. If you're going to use lion's mane, don't use the tincture. Use the capsulated form, because polysaccharides from mushrooms are best extracted with water, not alcohol. You're not going to pull polysaccharides out with alcohol, so forget the tincture. The alcohol should only be the preservative, not the solvent extraction process. But use the capsule. I think it was Stamets capsules, lion's mane. There's other stuff now. There's stuff you can get in bulk, lion's mane in bulk. There's other places you can get that stuff. So, yeah, there you have it. All right, folks, I'm going to jump off the call. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in today. Keep up the good work. Talk to you soon.